Brian Barnett is just a regular guy. He's not a doctor. He has no legal license in any field of mental or emotional health. Brian Barnett merely shares the insights he's gained from his personal experiences for anybody who may choose to use such information as he or she personally chooses, while accepting full responsibility for his or her own individual thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and actions. Brian Barnett assumes no responsibility whatsoever for anybody's individual choice to expose himself or herself to any information that Brian Barnett shares. And by listening to this program, you're acknowledging that you, and only you, are responsible for your own thoughts, feelings, and actions.
Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to The Last Symptom. I'm Brian Barnett, the creator and host of The Last Symptom. Thank you for joining me this week. Hope all you folks down there in New Orleans are doing all right. From what I understand, tornado ripped through there the other day. What was that? Yesterday for me. And I think I got that weather here where I'm at today. Had some tornado watches in effect and that sort of thing. Anyway, I haven't really read the news to see what the damage was done down there in New Orleans, but I hope that my audience, anybody who is down in that area, is taking care of themselves and staying safe. Nightcrawler hunting. You know what that is? You know what a nightcrawler is? A nightcrawler is a big earthworm. You know, a typical earthworm is kind of small, and a nightcrawler is really big. And the reason why they call them nightcrawlers is because they come out of the earth at night and they'll lay on the ground and mate. And then if you go outside with a flashlight and you spot them, they're very sensitive. They can feel the vibrations in the ground, and they go right back into the ground and disappear. So to catch them, you got to be pretty quick and stealthy. And so that's what I've been doing lately. Nightcrawler hunting. My daughter's just crazy about this. She's fascinated by it and has been begging me to take her out nightcrawler hunting. We did it last year, and she remembered it. It popped up into her memory out of nowhere, and she said, "Daddy, you got to take me out there, hunt for those worms." And I said, "Well, all right, let's do it." And, it's something I've been doing since I was a kid, but it never ceases to fascinate me. The first time I did it was at my grandpa's house. My grandpa on my mom's side of the family. And interestingly enough, this is not something that I ever saw happen growing up in the country. You know, I grew up real far out in the country, and going out and looking for night crawlers in the country, never saw them. This is something I think that happens in towns. You know, now that I'm telling you about this, I do have a working theory about why that is. It's the vibrations in the earth, I think. If you take, for example, a battery and you wrap it around a nail, like a 9-volt battery, and you wrap that around a nail, and you stick that nail into the ground, it'll bring night crawlers up to the surface. It'll bring worms up to the surface. So I think there's something about the activity going on in a tightly packed town, you know, where there's lots of people living and stuff, and the electricity flowing into homes, and something about that makes it so that nightcrawler hunting is best done in towns. I'll tell you another thing like that is squirrel hunting. I remember every time I go up to see Jordan, my late buddy Jordan, in Toledo, Ohio, he had squirrels running all over his backyard. And that's something I've noticed about towns, you know, when I lived in the suburbs in Philadelphia. Oh, tons of squirrels. But if you're out in the proper woods, you don't come across squirrels like that. You see one here and there. You really have to hunt them down. But in towns, they're just everywhere. And again, I think that's got something to do with towns being densely populated and resources and things to attract squirrels. But anyway, getting off topic here. My daughter's been wanting to do this nightcrawler hunting thing, and so I've been doing that with her, and it's recalled to me when I first did that. It wasn't living out in the country. It was one night when I spent the night at my grandpa's house, and my cousins were spending the night there too. And we had all decided to go fishing the next day. And so they said, let's go out and get some night crawlers. And we went out with flashlights. I must have been 10 years old. Went out with flashlights. And I was amazed just looking out at the yard and seeing all these worms stuck up out of the ground, laying on the ground. And they can sense your footsteps. They can sense the light from the flashlight. You really have to get one who's kind of lazy and not paying attention to be able to get him and pull him out of the ground. But it's just a fascinating thing that's been real nice to pass on to my daughter. You know, making memories like that. I know it's something that she's just going to be recalling for the rest of her life, what she did with Daddy. And then after we got done hunting the night crawlers, she says, Daddy, what's your favorite movie? That got us talking about movies. We didn't end up watching my favorite movie. My favorite movie of all time is A River Runs Through It. Directed by, what's his face? Robert Redford. Starring a real young Brad Pitt. But we got to talking about another movie that I really enjoyed, and that's called Frequency. That come out, I think, in 1999 or the year 2000 with Dennis Quaid. And it's got a time travel element, like a ham radio time travel element to it. And I started telling her kind of the synopsis of the movie about how this firefighter's got this son, and then the son grows up, and one night during a particularly strong aurora borealis, that is the northern lights, he gets on the ham radio and ends up talking to his dad 30 years in the past. And boy, I could see her imagination just going crazy with that. She said, let's watch that movie. So we started it. We got about an hour into it, and she fell asleep. So we're going to finish watching that next time I get a chance. Well, I hope you all are doing fine. Hope you all are happy out there and staying safe, like I said. Got some good things to talk at you about today. We'll tell you about something called the gel man effect, but that's not what I call it. I've always called it the Blind-Faith AMNESIA Effect, but I'm going to tell you what that's all about. Also, if you're hearing this episode of the show right around its publication time, I've got a watch party happening this weekend on Saturday, and you're invited. We'll talk about that. As I promised last week, I'm going to share my list of most important words to ruminate over in order to have the upper hand in life. Well, let's get into her. But before I do, I want to say one more thing about the night crawlers. And this is something I kept telling my daughter. I kept saying, she wants to catch them and pull them out of the ground. I said, why did you just grab them and do that? Because she's gotten on top of a couple of them. She says, they're slimy. I don't like it. They're gross. They're kind of scary. I said, what? Just 2 years ago, you were handling them with no problem whatsoever. You could have cared less. She says, yeah, well, that time's come and gone. That's basically what she said. She said, I'm not like that no more. So I said, well, what we can do is we can just run over to Walmart, or even the gas station. The local gas station sells night crawlers for nothing, a couple dollars. So we can do that, and then we don't have to do any of the work. And she says, well, I still would like to catch some, but I want to do that too. So besides hunting night crawlers, I've obligated myself to go to the local gas station or the local Walmart and pick up some of these night crawlers for her, and it's going to be interesting letting her play with these night crawlers. The gel man amnesia effect. Now, this is by Michael Crichton, and this phenomenon that I'm about to tell you is a phenomenon, like I said, that I, in conversations with myself, had named the Blind-Faith AMNESIA Effect. Didn't know anybody else had given it a name. Didn't know anybody else had ever talked about it. But Michael Crichton, the author apparently had. And I come across it in this article the other day, and I said, that's exactly the blind-faith amnesia effect that I'm always noticing in people and noticing even in myself. But it's this phenomenon, it's this psychological, logical fallacy that human beings commit that I'm very aware of. I just didn't know that somebody else had named it. But you can call it, I think my name's better, to be honest with you, but I'm biased. Michael Crichton calls it the gel-man amnesia effect. That's GELL-MANN. So I reckon it's named after somebody. Gel-man amnesia effect. Again, I call it the blind-faith amnesia effect. But it goes as follows. You open the newspaper to an article on some subject that you know real well. So let's say that you're a bricklayer, or let's say you're a scientist, or let's say that you're an entertainer, a musician, a cartoonist, whatever it is. You are an expert in something, and you open up the newspaper, or let's say you turn on the nightly news. It can be either one. And you begin reading an article on a subject that you are an expert in. So let's take music, just pulling one out of a hat. Let's take music. You start watching the nightly news and they begin talking about music, or you begin reading an article in the newspaper and they start talking about music. You read the article or you watch the program on the news and you realize that this journalist has absolutely no understanding whatsoever of either the facts or the issues. I mean, because you're the expert. As you're reading it, you go, this guy or this girl, this journalist, did no research. This journalist doesn't know what he or she is talking about. Again, it could be on the nightly news too. If you're a bricklayer, they start talking about some brick project or something, and you're watching it and you're going, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. Happens every day to everybody in whatever expertise you're in. You see that the journalist has absolutely no understanding of either the facts or the issues. And by the way, I'm reading this. I'm paraphrasing mostly Michael Crichton here. By the way, he's the author who wrote Jurassic Park, if you're wondering which author I'm talking about. You read the article and you see that the journalist has absolutely no understanding of either the facts or the issues. Often, the article is so wrong, it actually presents the story backwards, reversing cause and effect. Michael Crichton has a real good name for this. Michael Crichton called these wet streets cause rain stories. These are stories that get cause and effect in the wrong order. Wet streets cause rain stories. Isn't that kind of genius? Reminds me of some of the names that I have for some of the things that we talk about here. In any case, Michael Crichton says, you read with exasperation or amusement the multiple errors in a story or in a news story on the TV, and then you turn the page to national or international affairs, and you read the rest of the newspaper as if it was somehow more accurate about Palestine than the baloney you just got done reading. In other words, you turn the page and you forget what you know. And he calls that the gel-man amnesia effect. Again, I call it the blind-faith amnesia effect. You see what's happening? You're granting the media this imaginary authority that what they say has merit. You trust them. You're giving them your blind faith that they know what they're talking about. But even when they prove themselves disastrously that they don't know anything that they're talking about in one subject that you happen to know expertly, but then you turn the page and go on to a different subject, or on the nightly news, they stop talking about that subject and they go on to the next piece, you forget that they just totally revealed how ignorant they are, and you go right back to believing that they are trustworthy. For example, like, let's say that they're talking about the bricklaying, and now they go on to talking about the economy. You go, okay, well, the news knows what they're talking about the economy. You forget that they just proved to you that they don't know anything. They're about as trustworthy as a tick on a dog's butt. But you just totally forget that, and you go right back to trusting them again. Same way with the newspaper. And this blind-faith amnesia effect, I see it all the time in my own work. How many times have I proved to you, unquestionably, that they don't know the professional community as a group is totally incompetent when it comes to emotional disorders and borderline personality disorder, authentic recovery. They don't even know that it's inherited, not genetic. They don't even know that it's an emotional disorder, not a mental illness or a mental health issue. They place no importance on those things. They keep people enslaved to their emotional disorders, to borderline personality disorder, to narcissistic personality disorder. And even after this has been proven absolutely undisputably true, the person will come back and say to me, well, they diagnosed me with this other thing. In other words, giving them credit as being credible for some other thing unrelated to emotional disorder, supposedly, and just throwing their blind faith totally into it, 100%. Well, they said it, so it's got to be. So, I think about, the psychological professional community when they talk about, not to get into too sticky a subject here, but do you remember about 10 years back, maybe 20 years back, there was this whole big dispute about whether homosexuality, if a person is born that way or not. Well, what did the professional community, the psychological professional community, conclude? Well, I won't tell you, it doesn't matter. The point is, no matter what they concluded, they've proven completely incompetent in other areas. So why would we take them at their word at something like that? You see what I was saying? That's the blind faith amnesia effect. You forget that they have totally discredited themselves on this subject. You completely forget that, and you go right back to blindly giving them your faith and trust and confidence on an entirely different topic. And what I'm saying is that they're just incompetent, period, across the board. Don't find yourself a victim to the blind faith amnesia effect or the gel man amnesia effect that Michael Crichton talks about. Okay, got some announcements. So let's get into those announcements. They're not long. Bear with me here. And I know you hear it all the time, but I try to mix it up a little bit. And there's something I got. Well, I wanted to tell you about this watch party I've got coming up. But first, let me tell you about the lastsymptom.com. Free and paid services over there. That's my website full of resources. Lots of free stuff. Go over there and take advantage of it. The paid resources are one-on-one phone calls with me and one-on-one Zoom video calls with me. And of course, most importantly, the 2-week intensive, The Last Symptom Fundamentals course. What is that all about? It's an intensive 2-week course that is pre-recorded. Just like you folks who are watching this episode of the show on either Rumble or YouTube. The presentation is a lot like this, but instead of me just talking, I use a lot of visuals. So it's kind of like a PowerPoint presentation type visual presentation that goes on. I say 2 weeks, it's more like 10 days, but most people who end up taking the course go beyond 2 weeks because it's 3 hours a day. The way I've got it divided up is 3 hours a day for something like 10 days. So once a person actually gets in there, according to their schedule, and their enthusiasm and their rate of learning, it can easily stretch 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So it's an intensive course, and it's designed to provide you with all of the fundamental insights that are necessary for you to authentically escape emotional disorder. That includes borderline personality disorder, which was the specific emotional disorder that I myself had to authentically rid myself of. The Last Symptom online community. We would love to have you join us. That's thelastsymptom.locals.com. Another way to do it is to download the locals.com app from the App Store and just search for The Last Symptom by Brian Barnett. Now that brings me to the watch party I have planned for this Saturday. The other day, I come across a video on YouTube that I really enjoyed about Appalachia and about Appalachian speech and culture. Of course, I really enjoyed it because I'm Appalachian. But more importantly, I thought it'd be a lot of fun to get to watch this with my Last Symptom community as an enjoyable, laid-back, but still informative shared experience. So, for example, in part of the documentary, there are various Appalachian folk talking about how when they went out into the broader world, such as when they joined the military or they went to work far away, because of negative stereotypes about Appalachians, they got all self-conscious of their speech and of their culture and their heritage, and they started trying to hide it until they had to go through this process of eventually finding peace with being true to who they are, to their heritage, their culture, our way of talking, you know. And that was something that definitely happened to me. I've told you that I left home. I went to the big city. The first place I went to is I went north, and I lived in Columbus, Ohio for a while. And then from there, I went to Philly, and then from Philly, I went to the Boston area. But as soon as I got up to Columbus, I started trying to hide my way of talking. People would call me out on some of the words I'd use. I started trying to adapt to using different words. When I got to Philly and I was working in a professional environment as a medical interpreter in the hospital, definitely I felt the pressure for that. And then again in New England. Actually, there's a lot of prejudice in New England against anybody who talks like me. So again, for my livelihood, my professional livelihood, I found it necessary in New England to try to hide, in most cases, in most professional settings, to hide my way of talking at all costs, because people are looking for a reason. A lot of people, I'm not saying everybody in New England, but there are a lot of people up there looking for a reason to, let's say, to have their suspicions and their stereotypes confirmed. So they're just waiting for that. And so a person like me has to be careful up there, the way I talk and that sort of thing. So it definitely happened to me, and then I had to go through this process of during my recovery, especially because remember before, when I had an emotional disorder, it was all about living for other people, pleasing other people. Love me, love me, love me, please. I had to go from that to loving myself and being accepting and embracing and actually celebrating things about me that before I would have tried to hide. So it was interesting in this documentary that to hear these other fellow Appalachians talk about the same thing that I experienced. I've never seen another documentary where I got to hear other Appalachians talking about that same experience that I experienced. Another thing I could absolutely identify with was one Appalachian lady saying how she never realized that she was poor until the government come along and told her that she was poor. And I think I've mentioned in the past about how much I hate the media. When they do stories about Appalachia, their focus is always on just how poverty-stricken Appalachia is, and they focus on all the most outrageous extremes of of the culture and everything, which is ridiculous because if you think about it, every single culture, no matter where you live, has extremes. Boy, I could tell you something about Philly. And I could tell you something about New England. But that doesn't define them. There are other wonderful things about any area, any culture, any people, you know. But it always bugged me that's what Diane Sawyer and the media always choose to focus on. You see, if you go from living in a nice, tidy, neat condominium where somebody comes and manicures your lawn every week, you don't even have to do it. You pay you pay the condo fees or whatever, and you live. Everything's paved. You have a Starbucks down the road, no matter where you go, and you go from that into the area where I grew up, into Appalachia. It's different, but I'll tell you what it reminds me of. Every time Yankees, Northerners, city folk do a story on Appalachia, and they just, oh, look how poverty-stricken and everything they are, and oh, look how they talk, and look at the words they're using and everything. It reminds me of like back in the late 1800s when the white people pitied the American Indian and looked at them as brutes, as like uneducated brutes, and they felt that they were doing them a favor by pitying them, trying to teach them English, trying to make them do things their way. That's what it reminds me of. And it's not that it just reminds me of it. That's what it is. That's literally what it is. When Diane Sawyer gets on the TV and starts, oh, look at the poverty and all this down in Appalachia, and they send people down here, doctors and stuff like that, and send in people to teach us how to live the modern way and everything. One thing that's interesting about that, by the way, I'll just kind of give you a cheat insight into this documentary we'll be watching. They actually mention it. A lot of the words that we use in Appalachia, people say, man, that's crazy talk. The way they talk is just so weird. But most of the words that we use are actual words. It's not that we're uneducated. It's that people outside of Appalachia, their language has dumbed down. And I'm not meaning to insult anybody, but that is what is happening. Outside Appalachia, the language has dumbed down. So people have forgotten the old speech, the old, very rich and diverse speech that once existed, whereas people in Appalachia have been here for so long that a lot of those words have endured. One word that comes to mind as an interpreter was when I went up to Philly and I started interpreting in the hospital. It amazed me. The word for pomada that would always come to my mind, that's the Spanish word pomada, the word that would come to my mind was salve. So that's the way I would interpret it. These doctors, these medical doctors, who have been through 10 years of school, did not know the word salve. That is astonishing to me. It was astonishing to me. It's not so much anymore. But I had to learn a different word to interpret pomada into so that these people could understand, these doctors could understand what I was talking about. Do you know what salve is? Salve is ointment. So that's the word I went to using. So when I'd hear pomada, I'd have to remind myself, don't say salve, because nobody here knows what salve is. And I'd have to start using pomada. I'd have to start using ointment instead. But that's what it is. But in Appalachia, we still use the word salve. I'm trying to think of any other words just right up off the top of my head that I could think of. Well, ask me to make a list for you sometime. So hearing them talk about these words that are common and normal for us, but that can be confusing to outsiders, was really fun for me. I was like, yes, I'm not the only one. You got to understand, Most of the people that I grew up with never left this area. They might have left for a couple years, but then they come right back, and they've been here the whole time. My story's a little different because I grew up, I left, and I was going for 20 years before I come back. So I've had this whole broader world experience and all these, these conflicts and stuff that my Appalachian culture has come up against, and I've had to learn to understand and deal with. Whereas a lot of my fellow Appalachian folk have not had that. So to see this documentary and to see other people sharing these same experiences that I have experienced in life, it was just a real kick for me. I'd forgotten, for example, that when I was a kid, we'd carry things in pokes. So like you'd go to school and you'd carry your lunch in a poke. Do you know what that is? It's like a brown paper bag. So my mom would put my lunch in a poke, and I'd carry my lunch in a poke. Don't hear that out there in the real world. I almost said you don't hear that out in the real world. You don't hear that out in the broader world in the U.S. So I've looked up some methods for hosting a watch party on YouTube through a third-party service so that we can all watch this hour-long documentary together, synchronized with the ability to chat as we watch it. I'd like to invite you to join me to enjoy this documentary this upcoming Saturday, March 26, at 11 a.m. New York time. That's Eastern Standard Time. To do this, you have to be a member of our online community on Locals so that you can access the link that you will need in order to join us in that room, that virtual room, to watch this video together. I think the more the merrier. It could be a lot of fun. You'll have to forgive me if there are any technical issues because I've never done this before. This is the first time I'm doing this. I've never used this service that I'm planning on using. I've been trying to familiarize myself with it, but if you're on Locals, thelastsymptom.locals.com, or again, you can download the locals.com app from the App Store and join us that way. If you're on our group, then I'll be able to give you notices if any technicalities arise where I might still need to be able to talk to you. All right, my list of most important words to ruminate over reg-yoo-lar-lar-lee to have the upper hand on life. This is a list that I keep. I've been keeping it. I think I told you last week I've been keeping it at least since 2014. I think I've been keeping it longer than that, but what I might have done is created a brand new list and deleted the other list on my notes app on my phone. But it's not a long list. I wanted to create a list of words that are so powerful for emotional health that you wouldn't need like 90 different words. 10 to 20 words should be enough to give a person time to meditate and reflect regularly. Wow, I actually said it pretty good that time. On just these few words and live an improved life. So I would like to encourage you to make your own list. Maybe my list will give you some ideas. Maybe you can borrow some of mine and add some of your own. The first word on my list is relative/subjective. Relative/subjective. When I am in any situation or in any conversation with somebody and I start to feel my emotions rise or get heated or get stirred up, that's one word I go right straight to. I ask myself, are we talking about something here that is relative or subjective? It was such a relief for me going from a lifetime of taking comfort and finding security in black and white thinking. It was such a relief for me to escape that and to realize that very few things are black and white. As you know, I'm a person who not only believes in God, but my belief in God is very important to my life. And there are certain principles and laws that just come along with believing in God that a person tries to guide his or her life by, that I try to guide my life by. And I've not always been successful at it, and I've not always valued those laws and principles. When a person fails in that way, it can be kind of crushing. And when you're talking about somebody who comes from a family where you've been taught that your worth as a human being is not an inherent quality, that you are inherently defective and broken and bad, the combination of those two things is kind of like a 1-2 double whammy punch. It keeps you down. It keeps you from progressing. It keeps you from being positive. It keeps you from feeling like there's any point to anything. Because no matter how hard you try, for one thing, you're always worthless. For another thing, every little mistake you make is like the confirmation of it. And it's like the end of the world. It's like you've just ruined your relationship with God. So escaping this black and white, really strict type of thinking and going to this relative, subjective reality, which is what it is, the subjective / relative nature of life is more accurately reflective of real life. Because if you're somebody who reads the Bible, how many examples are there in the Bible of servants of God who had his favor but did really knucklehead terrible things? I think of King David. He's somebody I really admire. Did some terrible things. But the terrible things he did were subjective and relative. What were they subjective and relative in comparison to? Well, they were subjective and relative to all the good things he had done. His heart condition, what his intentions were, right? So one person might kill somebody else. That is not the same. Everything involved with that is not the same as somebody else who might kill somebody. There are other factors that need to be considered. There are other realities that were happening at the time. There are other considerations to be taken into, what the person's mindset was, what were their intentions, what was the circumstances of that, I don't want to say murder, because killing somebody, I don't know what it is legally, but if somebody's breaking into my window in the middle of the night, I don't know who they are. They're coming through my window. They broke my window. My alarm's going off. They've got a gun, and I struggle with them, and I end up killing them. I don't think of that as murder in the same way that I think of murder as me, seeing somebody in public and then stalking them and killing them. That, to me, is murder. Anyway, I'm getting off topic there, but you see what I'm saying. Everything is relative and subjective. I think I've told you in the past, like, animal cruelty is bad, right? Well, what about if some crocodile grabs my daughter's arm and is trying to drag her into a Florida lake, and I'm jamming it in the eye with a stick? Isn't that animal cruelty? Sure it is. So animal cruelty is bad in certain circumstances, and in other circumstances it's not bad at all. In fact, it's heroic, it's good, it's what you must do. So just escaping that black-white thinking, going to a relative subjective world, really, really nice. It's really taking the pressure off. It reflects reality more greatly. I refer back to it all the time. If I'm talking to my friend Jeff about something, and like I said, I start to feel my emotions get stirred, I ask myself, inside myself, are we talking about something that's relative and subjective here? Well, yes, we are, because almost everything is relative and subjective. So then it's just a matter of me applying. The next word on my list, would you like to know what that is? Context. Context. Context goes hand in hand with relative or subjective. So when you realize that something is relative, it's subjective, the next thing is to apply context. Well, let's apply context and see if the entire story don't change here. That's what we did when I was telling you about the crocodile, right? We applied the context of this is not just me picking on a defenseless animal. This is me trying to save my daughter's life. Now the abuse doesn't seem so terrible, does it? I'm still abusing the animal, but the context changes everything. It goes hand in hand with the word relative or the word subjective. When my daughter was very young, I remember one morning we got up. So the night before, she wanted to watch lots of movies. So we watched a bunch of movies. I think she was 3. And it got to be 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. She had never stayed up that late before in her life. I kept saying, honey, you don't want to go to sleep? No, Dad. No, Daddy. I want to stay up and watch movies. And I could see her head like doing the drippy thing and her eyes wanting to close and everything. But I said, well, the benefits here outweigh the cost. This is something that she really enjoys doing. It's time we get to spend together. I'm going to let her do it. She can sleep tomorrow as much as she wants. So can I. So the next day, she finally fell asleep. I finally fell asleep. And the next day, she was just not being herself. She was totally out of character, getting barky at me, kind of like, kind of like an angry cat, nipping at me at 3. And this is totally out of her character. She's so sweet. Under well-rested circumstances where she's feeling real good, never would she do anything like that. But she was kind of being disobedient. She was being snippy. And at first, I started to get angry. But then I thought, wait a second. I know my daughter. I know that this is not how she is normally. Let's apply some context. And of course, then I remembered, well, we were up until almost 2 o'clock in the morning the night before watching movies. She's never done that before. She's 3 years old or 4 years old. I don't remember what it was. She's never stayed up that late before in her life. This little tiny girl, this delicate little girl, didn't get her sleep. She got up earlier than I thought she was going to get up this morning. Of course she's going to act like this. She's a human being, and she's not just a human being. She's got more limits than normal human beings because she's a baby. She's a child. Once I applied that context, I remember all the frustration that I felt on me, which was about up to my ears, just went, I just felt it like slosh out of my body, just like that. So from frustration and anger, well, the kindlings of anger, it's like the kindling had been lit. Going from that to just feeling no anger at all, and actually amusement and empathy and sympathy for my daughter, like magic, just from applying context. It's such an important word. Like I said, goes in hand with the word relative or subjective. Both are the same thing, relative and subjective. But I include both because I like both. Next on my list is, would it surprise you to know, emotions/feelings. Remember I told you, emotions and feelings are the exact same thing. There is no constructive reason whatsoever to try to, as some intellectuals do, try to distinguish that, well, emotions are this, there's a little slight difference there, and feelings are this. And it's not constructive to do that. And if it's not constructive, it means it detracts from any constructive use in your life to do that. So don't get pulled into the black hole of intellectual goatee stroking. Emotions and feelings are the same thing, but they're so important. And I'll tell you why. Because our lives are determined by them, for better or worse. Now, they shouldn't be, but the world around you, that's what's happening. People should not determine their reality based on what they feel, but the world is doing that. When you are trying to escape from an emotional disorder, you've lived a life of doing that yourself. You're trying to escape that. But as you're looking out at the world and observing world conditions and the way people are, the way people make decisions, to understand that, this intellect and critical thinking is not going to explain it. That's not what explains what you see when you look out at the world. What explains it is emotions and feelings. In an orange slice a year or so ago, I explained how the cars you see being sold on the lot and the car that you are driving was not a critical thought decision. That was not an intellectual decision. Because if it were only an intellectual decision, all cars would be the same color. Is there any practical reason why cars should be all sorts of different colors? No, there's no practical reason for that. But, as you might have noticed, some things will sell for a much higher price simply because of the color they are. Why? To give you an example, if you go and you shop phone cases on Amazon, you'll come across one, you go, or let's say a camera or anything like that, you come across one, you say, wow, that's really nice. Oh, but look here. The one I was looking at is black, and it's for $10. But here's one for red. And the red one, wait a second, is $20 more. Okay, I'll take it. You see what I'm saying? The commercial world has learned that they can actually charge more for the exact same product based simply on its color. Does that not what can you learn from that? It blows your mind, doesn't it? But what can you learn from it? Well, feelings, emotions. That's why it's on my list. Because feelings, emotions are more powerful than intellect. It's the whole reason why human beings are prone, intensely prone, to things like cognitive dissonance, logical fallacies, confirmation bias. These are not things that come from critical thinking. These are things that come from what you feel. I think I told you that if I had to bet you $1 billion of somebody else's money, because I don't have $1 billion, obviously, but if I had to bet you $1 billion on why 90% of people vote their choice for president or whatever it is in your country, what it comes down to is feelings. How that person makes you feel. Not what they're saying, not their policies, not any of those things. That's what cognitive dissonance, that's what gives birth to cognitive dissonance. So for example, you say, well, that guy or girl, she's just so wonderful. I love her. She has my best interest in mind. She has everybody's best interest in mind. No way is she just looking out for herself, trying to enrich her own family or whatever. If this is how you feel about the candidate, and then you read something in the news or you hear something that contradicts what you feel about that person, if it contradicts it, you will either reject it out of hand and say, That's not true. It's not reputable, that report. Or you'll come up with an explanation to perfectly explain in your mind, because it doesn't perfectly explain anything, but you'll come up with an explanation for why this story can happen and have no effect whatsoever on how great this person is. That is the cognitive dissonance thing. The new information does not cause you to reevaluate how great you think the person is. You will deny it. Your emotions will say that information doesn't matter, it's irrelevant, it's a lie, or yes, maybe she did kill that alligator, but I'll bet you it was trying to drag her child into the lake, even though there's no information supporting the fact that she was doing it for any positive reasons whatsoever. So, emotions, feelings, how they control us. How do you keep them in check? Well, we don't have control over our feelings, but we can be honest with ourselves. We can be emotionally and intellectually honest with ourselves. We can recognize when our emotions are steering us in a way, and we can counteract that teeter-totter. We can bring that sucker into balance by applying critical thought. Okay, I really do like this guy. I really do. Find him very charming. I really like the things he says, how he says them and everything like that. That's how I feel. Now, but I don't want to be just a slave to how I feel. I don't want to let my feelings dictate for me reality and override my critical thinking. So I know that I am, as a human being, prone to that. My feelings have that type of power over me if I don't keep it in check. Let's now put it into check. Let's try to distance ourselves from how we feel, apply critical thinking, analysis, and those sorts of things, and bring that teeter-totter more into balance. Can you do that? Can you do that? I can't do it all the time. I can do it 90% of the time. But the secret really is in how honest are you? Right? There's some things that we have such an emotional attachment to that to betray or to contradict or to even take a step in a direction where we want to challenge it is testing. It's really testing. But what type of person are you? What is the quality of your character? The quality of your character will be determined by your willingness to do that at all times, just to make sure that you're not being controlled by your feelings, or that your feelings are making decisions for you or determining reality for you. Emotions, feelings, big one on my list. We could talk about that for another 3 days, but I'm looking at the clock and we're running out of time. Time is on my list. Here's my note for time. It's going to go by. It's going to pass no matter what. So whatever you're going to do it. Get started now. Because like drops in a bucket, after just a few months, an accumulation happens quickly. Especially if your mind is not obsessing about quick results. It reminds me of the expression we have, a watched pot never boils. So if you're sitting and you're trying to boil a pot of water and you're just watching it, it seems like it never boils. But if you step away, vacuum the carpet or something like that, and then come back to it, oh, there it's boiling. It's even boiling over. Happens fast. So you can either be looking with satisfaction on all the progress that is accumulated in a couple years. You see what I'm saying? Like in a couple years, you can be looking back and, wow, look at all of the accumulation of this progress that I've made in just 2 years. Or in 2 years, you can still be dilly-dallying and putting off what you could be doing. Standing in place, sunk in feelings of being overwhelmed and fretting about all the enormity of this thing before you. Enormous things happen in drops. Drop, 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 like a leaking faucet. Put a bucket underneath there. You have to empty it pretty soon, don't you? Well, that is like any major thing you want to accomplish in life. Get started now. The time is going to pass. The time is not going to stop. It's not going to pause. It's always flowing forward. So might as well get to it. Modesty. We've talked about modesty a lot. Modesty, if you'll remember, is recognizing your true limits and being content to work within those limits. Somebody within the Last Symptom community at thelastsymptom.locals.com. I know it seems like I'm pushing it real hard, but we want you there. One of our members in the Last Symptom Locals community posted on this very topic this week, and it was so well written, and it was so reflective and so good. You're missing out. Join us at Locals. Look up her post on modesty and how she is applying it in her life in very constructive and practical ways. It's so powerful, that quality. Next word on my list is responsibility. Wish I had more time to talk about that. We don't. Hate is the next word on my list. Dignity is the next word on my list. What can I tell you about dignity? Can somebody else take away my dignity? No. Nobody else can, against my will, take away my dignity. Human dignity is an inherent aspect of being a human being. Just like we have worth, dignity is a natural, inherent aspect of being a human being. But people can assault it. People can assault our dignity. Dignity involves the way we view ourselves, and by extension, the sorts of treatment that we view as acceptable in the way others treat us or deal with us. Every society, and I know this because the members of my community have a plethora of different backgrounds and cultures. And by the way, I've been wanting a natural use for the word plethora since like the late 90s when I saw the movie Three Amigos. And I swear to you, this is the first time in my life that plethora just rolled out of my mouth completely naturally, not forced at all. But there you go. My community has the members in my community have a plethora of backgrounds and cultures and circumstances that they're dealing with. So every society has its share of the poor, the defenseless, and the vulnerable. But simply being in these types of circumstances do not diminish a person's dignity. Remember, it's an inherent quality. What constitutes an affront on our dignity? It's the attitudes and reactions of other people that can constitute an affront to our dignity. But here's the most important point. Our overlooking, permitting, tolerating such affronts as acceptable or as not a big deal is a direct reflection on whether our own sense of dignity, our own sense of inherent worth is healthy or not. That applies to past abuses too. When you were a kid, you were ignorant. You couldn't have done anything about it even if you'd wanted. And most of us as children did not have the capacity to even process those sorts of things. But when you look back at past abuses that were done to you when you were a child, when you were an innocent child, the attitudes and the treatment that you endured, how do you view it? As something that's in the past, I'm just going to let it go. Well, that's a direct reflection on your sense of dignity. Now, I would never, ever, ever allow anybody to talk to manhandle, or to abuse my daughter today in the ways that I was treated in the past by my own parents. If I would not allow that for my daughter, how can I allow that for myself and say that I value my dignity? Something to think about. Something for you to think about. Next on my list, love, propaganda, patience, endurance, shame. These, I don't have time to, really give you the thick rundown of each of these words and what they mean for me or why they're on my list. I hope you're taking a note of them so that you can think about them later. Maybe that's an exercise for you. Why did Barnett put this on his list? Why, for example, is patience such an important word? How is that giving him an upper hand in life? Next word on my list is should. Here's why should in general is on my list. Because it's the most worthless word in the English language. It's the most worthless combination of words that has ever been created. Try to erase it from your vocabulary as much as possible. There's no such thing as you should have known something in the past. You didn't. You didn't know. Right? So should get you nowhere. There's nothing constructive about it. You could have known, but you didn't. The best you can do is fix it now. Know it now. Investigate it now. But as far as should, looking into the past, I should have. What's that going to do for you? It's going to do nothing for you. It's completely worthless. So, as much as possible, I tried to eliminate that out of my vocabulary, and I try to replace it with could. Like, when I think back to my ex-wife, Diana. Boy, I shouldn't have said that mean thing to her. Okay. But you did. It's much more constructive and useful to say, you could have said, you could have avoided saying that to her if you had known what you know now. You could have avoided being verbally abusive to her if you had done such and such work. You see how that's constructive. Could is constructive. Could have. Couldn't have. These are constructive. Should, it's not constructive at all. Because if I could have, in my brain, that's almost immediately followed up by if. Then you get context. Then you are allowed to forgive yourself for things you didn't know, or circumstances that you were dealing with that you're not dealing with now, or that would be a stress on any human being that was not directly as a result of, let's say it was directly as a result of abuse that you dealt with as a child that you had not identified yet. So shouldn't have, worthless, totally worthless. That's why that's on my list. Capacity versus ability is on my list. Forgiveness versus acceptance is on my list. Meekness. Why is meekness on my list? Meekness is another word kind of like modesty. Meekness means that you're teachable. That's why it's on my list. Meekness means that you're teachable and you're willing to view hardships, discipline, and consequences as tools for improving your character as a human being. So you view hardships, if you're a meek person, you're able to view hardships as serving a legitimate, even positive purpose. In that, even though it's not pleasant, and even though you might be miserable at the time, you know that there will be positive benefits from it. You'll be a better person coming out of it. I think about the folks who endured, even, stayed happy in the concentration camps, in the Nazi concentration camps. I mean, there was a lot of depression and a lot of suicide and stuff like that in the concentration camps. But there were also people who maintained a positive spirit. And what happened? What did all those hardships do for them? Well, they come out of it think of the inner strength that they now had that they could pass on to other people. And I don't want to be misunderstood by saying that the Holocaust was anything good. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that any hardship that a meek person goes through can actually create a better person. It can create a better person because they come out, they've survived it, they've endured it. Now think about the benefit that that person is now to society. And so I'm thinking about like my own hardships that I've dealt with in life. At the time, totally miserable, hated it, didn't want it, didn't like it, cried all the time. Sometimes felt like I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, but I endured it. I survived it. I come out. Do you think that if I have to endure that in the future again, that I'm not better equipped for it? Sure I am. Not only that, but I'm living a better life right now than I was before I went into those hardships. Another benefit of it is that I don't take the things that I have for granted anymore. I had ice cream tonight. I had ice cream and a couple shots of whiskey and a steak for supper. I don't take that for granted. To me, that's like living like a king. So happy to have those things. Don't take it for granted. I also don't assume that I will always have those things. But I appreciate them while I do have them. So those are the sorts of things I'm talking about. You know, being meek naturally also involves living with patience, endurance, mildness of temper, without haughtiness or vanity. So it's the sort of mental attitude that makes it possible to endure injury with patience and without irritation, resentment, or vindictiveness. Okay, we'll just wrap up the last couple words here on my list again real quick. Meekness. Next word on my list is courage. Courage, which is not the same thing as bravery. And the final word on my list is compassion. So there you go. That is my list of most important words to ruminate over reg-yoo-lar-lar-lar-lee to have the upper hand on life. Maybe in a future show we can flush out some of the other ones. If you'd like my personal thoughts about some of these words on my list that we did not go into detail about, ask me about them on our online community there on Locals, thelastsymptom.locals.com. I had a story I was going to tell, a campfire story, and I had a poem, but we're over time. I'm not going to get to it. We'll talk about it next week. Folks, you take care of yourselves. Have a wonderful weekend. I hope to see you for the documentary this Saturday, 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Put it on your calendar. Meet us Saturday morning at 11 o'clock to watch this documentary together. I'm looking forward to it, and I think we'll have a good old time. This is Brian Barnett signing off. Be good to yourselves.